The heat over the verge was a living thing, pressing down until every breath felt like drawing air through grit. Sunlight poured straight from the colony sky without mercy, bleaching the colors from the sandstone walls and turning the stone underfoot into a slow-burning plate. The smell was a dense weave of dust, cooked spice, hot metal, and human sweat. Shouts ricocheted from every direction, vendors calling prices, traders arguing over the worth of scraps. The hollow clang of metal dropped on metal. There was no space for quiet here, no place where sound did not follow. Rainon moved through it like a man wading against a current, the strap of his satchel biting across his shoulder. The years had left their lines on him, creased skin, browned by wind and sun, a short, uneven beard that caught the light like worn thread, and deep-set eyes that scanned the world the way his fingers searched cloth, always looking for the place where it might give way. He told himself he was here for 2 missing bolts of heritage cloth, logged as delivered to the verge, but gone before they reached his workshop. That was the reason he would give if anyone asked. The truth sat lower in his chest, heavier. He had a habit of walking toward trouble when it was staring straight at him. The crowd thickened near the central lane, and he could hear the sharp rhythm of a man's voice, raised for attention. The platform was nothing more than a rusted alloy, sheet on uneven scaffolding. On one side stood a short, broad-shouldered merchant, his arm cutting theatrical arcs through the hot air. On the other side, motionless, except for the sway of the heat, stood a woman. Tall, slim, her shoulders set like someone bracing for an impact she knew was coming. Her skin was pale blue, marbled faintly with violet at her ribs and thighs, the patterns visible beneath the thin gold chains draped across her body. They were ornament, not clothing. A belt of medallions low at her hips, a loose chain across her chest that covered nothing and revealed everything. Her emerald hair hung to her waist in tangled waves, strands stuck to her skin from sweat. Amber eyes, startling even in the glare, fixed not on the crowd, but on a single patch of space directly ahead, as if holding her gaze there might make the rest of it disappear. The merchant's voice carried over the noise. Been in the circuit too long. Last chance before she's gone for scrap work. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rainon heard the tone and knew it too well, the lazy cruelty of a man sure of his rules. She wasn't broken. Not yet. He could see it in the weight on the balls of her feet, the absence of tremor in her hands. The merchant yanked her chain too. Spin her toward the crowd. She turned only half before twisting just enough to break his grip. A few onlookers snickered. The merchant's smile thinned. Rainon stepped forward, the crowd parting without meeting his eyes. He kept his pace steady, his expression neutral, the way you approached a skittish customer who might bolt. "I'm taking her," he said flatly. "Buying trouble, human?" The merchant asked with a smirk. "No," Rainon replied. "I'm putting her under work contract. Model and consultant for textile restoration." He pulled from his satchel a stamped commission slip and a gilt disc, kind that made petty arguments costly. "Registrar already has the file. You can fight it if you want the lane shut down for a week while they check your books." The clerk at the kiosk was already lifting her stamp. The merchant's expression soured. He let go of the chain. Rainon stepped to the edge of the platform and held out a folded linen cloak-cling, heavy, the weave thick enough to block the sun. "If you come with me, it's by choice," he said. "If not, I'll leave this with you anyway." She looked at the cloak for a long moment, the air between them hot and still. Then, without a word, she reached out and took it. The chains clinked beneath as she swung it over her shoulders, adjusting its weight. Rainon stepped back. She came down from the platform without looking at the merchant again. At the base, she caught the end of her collar chain, bent it against the rail until the cheap alloy snapped, and dropped the broken ring into the merchant's palm. He turned toward the outer lane. She followed, no signal needed. Neither looked back. The heat broke a little as they left the main lane, the taller walls of the outer quarter casting long shadows across the stone. Here the air was cooler, still carrying the faint tongue of dust, but without the sharp metallic edge of the verge. Their footsteps echoed differently, to less trampled ground, more open space between the people who passed. Reinen kept his pace steady, not slow enough to seem uncertain, not fast enough to suggest he meant to lead her anywhere. She hadn't agreed to go dot. She walked beside him with the careful alertness of someone counting possibilities. Her eyes tracked doorways, the corners of alleys, the small shifts in shadow where movement might hide. The cloak hung loose over her shoulders now, but her hands stayed free, unencumbered. When they reached the narrow lane where his workshop stood wedged between a mechanic's shed and an old stone house, he fished for the key in his pocket. The door stuck in the frame, as it always did. He leaned his shoulder into it until the wood scraped and the smell of washed cloth and clean air drifted out. Inside, the room was bright in a muted waylight falling through two high windows onto a long work table covered with folded fabrics, a narrow stove in the corner, and shelves stacked with bolts of cloth bound in paper. A ceiling fan ticked at a steady pace overhead. Everything was warm but orderly. Reinen stepped aside to let her in. "You can decide which room," he said. "There are two. Each has a window that opens. Bathrooms at the end of the hall. No locks yet, but I've got spare latches. I can mount one in 10 minutes. Mount two," she said, her voice rough from heat and dust. "Inside?" "Inside. Done." He dropped his satchel on the table and pulled a small wrapped bundle from it. "There's food. But first," he laid the stamped registrar slip where she could see it. "Textile Guild Work Commission. Model and consultant for drape tests, dye classification, cultural notes. It grants protected status while you're here. You can leave whenever you want. If another stallmaster tries to interfere, I show this. And call the registrar. They're slow, but they'll come." She didn't touch the paper, only read it. Terms, room, food, and a daily stipend? If you consult, I log hours and pay the guild rate. If you don't, protection still stands. Her eyes moved from the paper to him. "And you don't touch me without asking." "I won't," he said, "and I don't owe you any answer I don't want to give." "Agreed." He turned to the stove, set a kettle, and dropped a handful of lentils into a pot with chopped onion and dried pepper. The scent rose slowly warm. Steady, unhurried. "You were at the verge for cloth," she said after a while. "Not me." "Yes. Then why the cloak?" "I carry one when I go there. Sun burns skin fast. Cloth saves it. People forget that." She considered this, her expression unreadable, and for the first time since the platform, her shoulders eased by a fraction. The morning air was cooler than the day before, a pale wash of light slipping between the rooftops as they set out. Reinen had already boiled grain and pepper for breakfast, served it without crowding her space, and let the conversation rest where it fell. By the time they stepped into the lane, the street still held the dampness of night. The stones darkened and slick in the shadows. She walked beside him, the cloak left behind in favor of the wrap he'd stitched from green silk scraps, tied high at her hip. Her stride was steady, but her eyes worked constantly, taking in doorways, counting turns, noting who lingered too long near a wall. Reinen kept to the main streets, as she'd insisted, bypassing the short, cramped alleys that cut time, but offered too many blind corners dot by the time they reached the west canals. The smell was already in the air, a chemical bite from the old dye houses, cut with the sour tongue of water that hadn't moved clean in years. The buildings on either side bore the history of it in long stains down their walls, reds and yellows and deep greens baked in by seasons of sun. She stopped at the first corner, closed her eyes, and drew a slow breath through her nose. "South wind," she murmured, "cuts the sand on the left side. We go right." Rainan didn't question her. He fell into step as she guided them along the canal's edge, her head turning slightly now and then, as if following a thin thread. Through the air. When they reached a squat warehouse with its side door half open, she paused. One step inside, and the air shifted musture, heavy with fabric dust and the faint tang of old paper wrap. She moved past the neat rows of intact bolts, straight to the darker corner, where bundles leaned too deep against the wall. Kneeling, she pressed her hand to one wrapped in plain paper and twine, lifted it to her face, and inhaled. "This is one," she said, "cut into half lengths, but the weave's the same. Smells like the canal it was dipped in last month." She tore a corner of the paper, revealing a deep crimson cloth, edges faded to brown. Rainan crouched beside her. "That's mine," he said. A shadow fell across them. A tall, lean man stood in the side doorway, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes flicking from her to the bundle, then to Rainan. "That's not for sale." "It's already mine," Rainan said, voice even. "Sold once. Now I'm buying it. Back so you don't lose a day explaining to the registrar how it ended up here. You can't prove it." Rainan reached into his coat and pulled a folded manifest. Lot number, dye origin, weave code, all registered. The man's eyes paused at the guild seal. After a moment, his shoulders eased, but his jaw stayed tight. "Half the standard. Rate, cash." "Done," Rainan said, already counting the notes. He placed them on a crate, without looking away Dot, as they stepped back into the sunlight. She carried one of the bundles herself, balanced on her hip. "You didn't bargain," she said. Dot double quotes, "No. I wanted it out of his hands now, not after an hour of posturing." She thought on that for a few strides, then nodded once. Smart. Men like that don't like holding something the registrar might. Stamp. They took the long way home, the noise of the canals fading behind them, the weight of the cloth between them feeling more like a joint claim than a recovery dot by the time they reached the workshop. The heat had risen high enough to turn the air in the lane into a wavering shimmer. Rainan unlocked the door and held it open while she stepped inside, setting the bundle of crimson cloth on the table with deliberate care. She untied the wrap at her hip, just enough to loosen it and let the air cool her skin, but she didn't. Remove it. The cloak still hung on the back of the chair where she'd left it that morning. Rainan unwrapped the bundle, peeling away the dusty paper until the cloth lay bare. The color was still rich in places, dulled in others where age and mishandling had taken their toll. He ran his hands along the weave, fingertips mapping the thin spots. "These will take time," he said. She came around the table to watch. Arms folded loosely. "Show me how you find the weak points." He handed her a strip no wider than her palm. "Hold it to the light. Shift it until you see lines a shade darker than the rest. That's compression. Those threads will give first." She moved to the window, lifting the strip, turning it until the sunlight cut through clean. "Here, and here," she said, pinching the spots lightly. "Good," Rainan said. "Now what would you do?" "Cut around them if there's enough to spare. If not, reinforce from the back with something lighter so it doesn't strain under." "Wait." A corner of his mouth lifted. "You've done this before." "Not like this," she said. "At the dye shop, we didn't have the luxury of time. You fixed it fast or it failed later, and no one cared because it was already sold. You'll find here that time is half the work," he replied, threading a needle. "Slower means better. Also means you see every flaw." She rested her, hands on the table, close but not touching the cloth. "Then give me something I can't ruin. I'll try your way." He passed her a dull blue piece with a clean edge. Work from the back. Keep the front smooth. She watched his first few stitches, then bent over the fabric, moving with the steady focus of someone used to working under a clock, but adjusting to a new pace. He didn't correct her unless a slit would cause real damage. When she tied off the last stitch and turned the piece over, her eyes narrowed. "It looks the same." "That's the point," he said. "Good repair disappears." She glanced toward the crate of scraps in the corner. "You keep anything in there worth wearing?" "Nothing. Fit for sale, but enough for something that lasts," he said. She knelt, sorting through the pile with quick, practiced hands. One by one, she set aside pieces of silk and light linen, building a small stack of smooth, strong strips. From the bottom of the crate, she pulled a deep green length of silk. "This will be the base. Wrap skirt, tied at the hip. Practical?" Rynan asked. "Comfortable," she said. "And mine." By late afternoon, she had the fabric pinned and cut. When she tied it on, the high knot left her legs free, the slit long enough to move without restriction. She caught his eye briefly, then looked back down at the fit. "Better than chains," she said quietly. He didn't argue. "Do you want to keep working?" She shook her head. "No, I'll cook tonight." They moved easily in the small kitchen, avoiding each other's path without thinking. She sliced root vegetables while he rinsed grains, the smell of broth and herbs filling the air. When they ate, it was without the guarded silences of the night before. The rhythm between them had shifted, still careful, but with room enough. For choice morning light spilled across the workshop table, pooling in soft gold over the tools and scraps Rynan had left out the night before. He had been up since first light, pressing a stubborn fold from the green silk wrap he'd made her, and checking the seams on the crimson panels. The air was still cool, touched with the faint scent of boiled grain from the stove. The click of her latch came from down the hall steady, unhurried. She stepped into the room wearing the new skirt she had sewn from the deep green silk, the tie pulled high at her hip, paired with a fitted top she'd cut from a lighter scrap. Her hair was pulled back from her face, showing the clean line of thigh. Her neck with a collar mark had faded almost to nothing. She carried the keys in her hand, turning them once before slipping them into the skirt's pocket. He slid a bowl toward her as she sat. Grain with pepper and salt, easier than verge food. She ate without hesitation this time, pausing only to glance at the rolled registrar slip still on the table. "You keep that there?" "For now. First thing anyone sees if they walk. In uninvited. Makes them think twice before asking questions they can't put in writing." She nodded once, then leaned back slightly. "Before we start," she set down her spoon. "I've decided what you can call me. Seller. My mother would have given me that name if the clerks hadn't cut it down for their forms. I stopped using it years ago, but it's mine." He met her gaze. "Then it's yours here." After breakfast, they turned to the work that had been building for days. The crimson heritage banners lay across the table, seams reinforced, ready for final. Draping before the memorial exhibit. Rynan set the first panel between them, and together they unrolled it, lifting carefully so the repaired edges didn't strain. "Hold this side," he said, and she kept the silk level while he secured the opposite corner. The color was deep. Again, the surface smooth where it had once been frayed. The left corner dips 1/2 centimeter, she observed, eyes tracking the drape. "You can correct it with the top stitch." He adjusted as she suggested, and she gave a single approving nod. Better. By midday, all 3 panels hung on their wooden frames, each one balanced and whole again. The repairs were invisible except to the 2 people who knew where to look. Rynan stepped back, wiping his palms on a rag. "That's it. Commission. Work's done." Seller studied the banners for a long moment. "It doesn't feel done." "It's not for us," he said. "Only for the contract." Her gaze shifted from the silk to him. Then, what comes next? That's up to you, he said. You can leave with the end of the commission, or stay and work on something that answers to no one's list. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she crossed to the crate of scraps, pulling out a length of pale gold silk and running it between her fingers. If I stay, I want what I make to be mine from start to finish. Then that's what we do, Rynan said. They worked. Side by side into the afternoon, the banners complete, the scraps beginning to take shape into something new. And for the first time since the verge, the space between them felt less like a temporary arrangement and more like the start of something neither of them meant to undo. The day the exhibit team arrived, the air carried the sharp clang of cart, wheels on the main street, and the low voices of early vendors setting up their stalls. From the workshop window, Rynan watched the covered transport make its slow way through the lane, the heritage seal of the inner quarter painted in careful gold on the side. Sunlight struck the frame inside, catching the crimson silk and making the banners glow as if they'd been lit from within. Sella was already dressed when she stepped out of her room, a green wrap skirt tied high, paired with a new top she'd pieced from deep brown and pale gold silk in a diagonal cut across her torso. It was modest in coverage, but deliberate in design. Her choice in every stitch. The cloak was nowhere in sight. Her eyes went first to the banners, then to him. They look better than when we hung them, she said. They'll hold for years. He replied, maybe longer than the people who come to see them. When the transport stopped outside, 3 workers came in with the easy efficiency of people who had done this 100 times. One unrolled a padded sleeve for each banner. Another took frame measurements. The third noted every detail on a clipboard. Rynan signed the release without hesitation, his signature steady. Seller stood just off to the side, watching every motion until the last banner was rolled, sealed, and carried out. They'll display them properly? She asked, not accusing, simply expecting an answer. They have to, Rynan said. Registry rules. If they don't, half the guild will be at their door. She nodded once, satisfied. When the transport rumbled away, the workshop felt abruptly bare. The wall where the banners had hung was empty, the echo of their color still lingering in the air. So, she said, leaning against the doorway, the contract's finished. It is, he agreed. That means I'm no longer under guild protection. That's true, he said, but you don't need it anymore. Her gaze held on him for a long moment, weighing the truth in that. You're not going to tell me to leave. No, he said plainly. This place is yours as much as mine if you want it. She stepped toward the table, her fingers brushing the edge. You told me some things can't be fixed, only cared for. You meant me. I meant you, he said. Her hands rested flat on the wood. Then I'll stay, not as a guest, not as a consultant. I'll work here with you. We'll make things no one else can claim. He let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Then we'll need to clear more shelf space. She smiled small, certain, and reached into the crate of scraps. Then we start now. They worked through the rest of the morning without hurry, side by side. Sometimes their hands brushed when they reached for the same piece of cloth, neither pulling back. By afternoon, new projects were already forming a high-cut skirt for her, a set of deep blue wall hangings he would sell to quiet buyers. The space no longer felt like a room waiting for work to return. It felt like a place where work began and ended here. Later, as the light slanted golden through the windows, she set down her needle and looked across at him. There's one more thing, she said. He raised an eyebrow. I never told you why I came with you that day. You didn't need to, he said. I'll tell you anyway, she said. It wasn't the cloak. It wasn't the paper. It was that you didn't look at me like something you could win. You just gave me a way down. No one had done that before. He didn't answer immediately, only held her gaze. Then let's make sure you never have to stand on a platform again. She gave a single, slow nod. And for the first time, when evening came, her door stayed open. Not as an invitation, but as a sign that the locks she'd asked for were no longer the only thing keeping her safe. Several weeks later, the workshop had a different rhythm. The wall where the crimson banners once hung was now lined with finished garments and carefully folded bolts of their own making garments that bore no registry tag, no commission order, no buyer's claim. The air smelled of pressed silk and warm thread, a gentler scent than the acrid dyes of the West Canals. Outside, the quarter's noise rose and fell, but inside, the hum of work was unbroken. Rhinon sat at the long table, repairing the lining of an old ceremonial sash. His hands moved without rush, guiding the needle along a frayed seam until the fabric lay smooth again. Across from him, Seller stood by the open window, the deep green robe she had been working on held up to the light. Sunlight caught the fine stitches along its hem, revealing how closely the new work matched the old. She tilted it, checking the drape, then lowered it with a small nod of approval. "You're staring," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Just making sure you don't try to finish that M without eating first," he replied. She set the robe on the chair and crossed the room without hurry, her bare feet making little sound on the worn boards. "You've been finding reasons to stop me a lot lately." "I've had more time to notice things," he said. "Like what?" He leaned back slightly, meeting her eyes. "Bet you've been leaving your door open every night." Her expression didn't shift into caution this time. "Maybe I want you to see I'm not walking away anymore." The sash lay forgotten between his hands. He studied her face for the flicker of hesitation that used to be there. He didn't find it. She stopped at his chair, her knees brushing his, and laid her hands lightly on his shoulders. He rose without breaking eye contact, and together they moved toward her room. Inside, the window stood open, letting in the warmth from the street below. The bed was neatly made, the green skirt folded on the chair, her top draped over it. She closed the door, not to shut him out, but to mark the moment as theirs. When she untied the wrap at her waist, it slid loose in a slow, deliberate motion. He stepped closer, hands brushing her arms, feeling the slow shift of her breath as her shoulders lowered. Her fingers touched the line of his beard, then rested against his cheek. Weeks of quiet boundaries, of choosing each step, had brought them here. Now there was no need to pause. She guided his hands where she wanted them, taking her time, and he followed without pushing ahead of her lead. The room, filled with the sound of their breathing steady at first, then deeper, until it matched in rhythm. When she whispered his name for the first time like that, he looked at her, and in her eyes he saw everything they had built from the platform to this moment. The choice to stay, the trust to be close, the knowledge that no one here was owned. Later, lying with her head against his chest, the window open to the warm night, she said quietly, "I'm not leaving." "I know," he answered outside. The quarter's voices blurred into a distant hum. Inside, the work, the home, and the life they had made belonged to both of them now. And that was enough.